It's time to accelerate. Hey friends, this is Andy. Welcome to episode 491 of Accelerate, the sales podcast of record, where I hold in-depth conversations with today's leading experts in sales, marketing, and leadership 6 days a week. Joining me on Accelerate today is Derek Draper. Derek is the CEO of Pattern. It's an application that's an enterprise notepad for sales teams. Now we're going to talk a little bit about Pattern, but I also invited Derek onto the show to talk about some writing he's done about the daily habits that successful sales reps share, that all successful sales reps share. So really interested to get into that and also get his thoughts about sales productivity. So let's jump into it. Derek Draper, welcome to Accelerate.
Hey, thanks so much, Andy. It's great to be here. I'm really pleased and honored to be on the show.
Well, we're pleased and honored to have you on the show. So first question, it's sort of a broad question, but it's one I like to ask founders and CEOs of companies like yours. So what's the single biggest challenge sales reps are facing today?
I think I was actually looking at your podcast recently, and there was an interview you did with Jill Conrath, and it was overwhelm, and that really resonated with me. I think for the salespeople that we talk to and we build for, sales is increasingly complex, and salespeople are asked to do a lot. They're asked to manage relationships with multiple different stakeholders inside an organization. Not to mention, a lot of the folks that we build for have lots and lots of those relationships. They're tasked with managing anywhere between 100 and 300 accounts, and they're managing those relationships across a whole bunch of different systems that really weren't designed for them, and they're forced to either just be dropping the ball left and right, or I think a lot of times the very successful salespeople that we see are people that are just freaks of organization, and they just refuse to let balls drop, or they drop as few balls as possible, and that just means that they're more responsive to their customers, they're more attentive, they're following the process that they should be following, or that they believe they want to follow more consistently than their peers, and that in my mind is what ends up leading to a lot more success. So I actually really like Jill's answer about just kind of dealing with the overwhelming nature of what sales is today as being the biggest challenge.
And when you refer to sales, are you talking about SDRs, inside sales, field sales, account execs, all of the above?
Well, I think it's hard to draw generalizations for every single type of role, at every single type of company and all that sort of thing. I mean, I'll tell you who we think the most about. I think a lot about what the people that I think are the future of selling, which are the folks that are, they're in their early 20s for the most part, maybe don't have a tremendous amount of experience. And again, they're tasked with managing a bunch of these different relationships where buyers, the people they're talking to, are more educated than ever before. It's interesting to think about 10, 15 years ago, salespeople as the conduit of information. I mean, before the internet really proliferated, the only way that you could effectively understand, what's out there and how it worked and what it cost was by talking to a salesperson. And that was a really distinct advantage for us as salespeople. But now, there's too much information out there. Buyers are a lot more educated than ever before. And I think that puts the salesperson at somewhat of a disadvantage in the traditional sense. And that's why you see a lot of people talking about the best salespeople of today and the future are the ones that are able to be consultative, be client focused, and help build the bridge between, the client's business and their problems and what, a given product can do to help create value in that organization, as opposed to just simply releasing information, giving demos, providing proposals, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. Well, so sort of 2 points about that, and I'll try to remember the second one after I ask the first one.
Yeah, sure.
It's not always easy. Is you use the word disadvantage. So how do you envision sales people today are sort of at a disadvantage, or it's just they're not as advantaged, let's say, as they were before?
Well, there's a lot of people in sales that believe that you really should control the process, and the more that you can control the process from end to end, the more likely, in a perfect world, you are to give that buyer a good experience, and the more likely you are to be able to sort of put them through the experience that you think is going to put your product in the best light.
Control's an illusion, though, right?
I think the buyer is ultimately in control,
sure,
at the end of the day. But I guess my point from the previous comment was that, if you don't have information, it's hard to kind of know where to go and how to drive the conversation versus I've seen all kinds of different stats out there and people seem to disagree fairly significantly, but some people say that a buyer's journey is 50% or 70% complete before they engage with a salesperson. And other people say, no way, that's crazy,
Yeah, I know. You're right. That is a touchstone of controversy, yes.
But I do think that people are just, whether they believe it or not, that they're much more empowered today to kind of understand what's out there, to identify price points, to make decisions or assumptions before ever engaging with a salesperson. And sometimes, that can not work in your favor. And I guess that's what I mean by disadvantage, in the sense that it's harder to know when you speak to a customer than it was in the past, because you kind of could know that they didn't probably have a ton of information about what that person has done up to date, what their real intentions are, and sort of, the process that they have gone through and would like to go through versus what you want to sort of guide them through, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I know there's a excellent book out there called Absolute Value, written by a couple of professors from Stanford, about this idea, sort of extending some of what you talked about, is that given the abundance of information that's out there, and not just product information put out by vendors, but review sites and
Right.
other places that actually buyers are at a point now where, contrary to their belief, is based on their research, that contrary to sort of this opinion that buyers are overwhelmed by information, that actually buyers are actually pretty adept at navigating the information that's out there, and all these, I said review sites, vendor sites, so on, to actually have a much better understanding of what sort of the experienced utility would be of actually a product that they're considering to buy. Mm-hmm. And whether, to your point about that point, whether 50% or whatever, I think it's almost immaterial, because at some point they're going to have more information than you expect they have in
Right.
the process, whether it's at the beginning or after 2 calls or whatever. That balance has shifted.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's why it's critical that, the value of a salesperson has moved from just simply supplying information, telling someone how your product works, to really understanding their situation, aligning with their problems, and then building a bridge back to your solution and how you can help. And that's something whether it just wasn't a requirement maybe as much in the previous days before buyers were so aware, I think it is definitely much more of a requirement of success in today's and the future sales world, just to really align yourself with the customer, understand their pain points, and also realize when you can help somebody, and be value added in that perspective, and realize you're not trying to sell everybody. You're really trying to find people where there is a fit and you can add value. And if there isn't that fit, then you need to move on and find somebody else.
So based on another comment you had made earlier, we have these certainly in the Valley or in the tech space, we're pioneering the whole inside sales model, the SDRs, specialized sales roles, and so on. So how in your mind do you see that this cohort of new people coming into the profession, how are they going to progress in their careers? Because this first step that they're on is, by all opinions, pretty much of a brutal weeding out job that gives them limited exposure to the entire sales process, and certainly in buying process. Well, flip it. So how are we helping them evolve? Right? How do we make sure these people learn what they need to learn in order to progress and become the account execs, whether inside it or field sales reps or whatever?
It's a great question. And I would draw from my experience here back as the VP of sales at a company called Wildfire that was sold social media marketing software back in the heyday there. And that was a fast growing story. I joined that company in 2009 as the 4th employee and first salesperson. And 3 years later, our company was 450 people. We were doing almost 50 million in sales, and my organization across sales and customer success was 300 people. And I had an SDR team of about 50 at that point. And the SDR role can be a brutal one. You're asking people without a lot of experience to come in and effectively get rejected many, many times per day. And I can speak from experience, because that was my first job as well. Before the term SDR even existed, I was kind of what was called an account executive. back in the early 2000s, my job was just to make 200 phone calls a day and try to set up appointments for somebody else. I think where we found success was, understanding, first of all, that not everybody's going to make it. And that's okay. I think people naturally are interested in trying sales for a variety of reasons. And there are some people that stick and some people that don't. And we hired people, not with the kind of assumption that they would move into sales, but more giving them the idea that this is a way to try out sales. And beyond that, it wasn't just about doing the job. It was about kind of building your skill set. It was a curriculum of how to understand not only our space, but the mechanics of selling, and begin building the skills that are required to be a successful account executive. And so, a big part of it was doing the job, but there was also a big part of it that was education, that was progression, and then that was kind of, the team oriented, helping other parts of the org with different, managing the sales cycle from different perspectives. And it took us some time to kind of tweak that. I had a great colleague by the name of Dan Davis who led that effort for us. And by the end of that program, let me step back and say what was really great about that experience is, people, whether they stayed in sales or not, they had a very warm feeling and strong cultural identity and bind with the organization. So that our SDR group became the primary feeder for almost every role, every non-technical role inside the company. If marketing needed to hire, they came and said, "Hey, can we talk to your SDRs? Product, customer success." I mean, a lot of people would come and steal, quote unquote, steal people from that organization, which I thought was really great, because those are people that were kind of, interested in looking at other things anyway. And they just very quickly plugged into these other roles, which powered the growth of the company and kept culture really strong. But by the end of that program, or, roughly around the time of acquisition, what we had found was we understood exactly where the kind of graduation rates were, where it made sense to take someone from an SDR and put them in an account executive role. And, at that point, I think of the top 25% of our performers in the account executive role, 80% of them had gone through that training program. And so we just found that as a much stronger pool of talent, to excel at the account executive level, and we could kind of effectively control their learning and their process, as opposed to hiring people externally that, quote unquote, had experience and would hopefully be good. I mean, our hit rate there was not quite as high.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I just sort of wrote about that for another company that asked me to contribute to one of their blogs. Is this much more rational way to go about it than relying on the hired guns coming in from the outside that, have a resume that's full of 1-year stints at a variety of places. And as you said, they may or may not work out. But the only thing you know for sure is they'll be gone in another year. And
right.
In the meantime, you haven't developed your bench strength.
Right.
Yeah, very interesting. It's funny. I'm glad you went into that detail, because I spoke to a lot of CEOs in this company and a lot of CEOs on the show, and not many have been as deliberate in being able to explain, okay, this is how we're using this role to develop people. And I like the sort of spin is not just for roles in account exec, but for, as you said, the non-technical roles throughout the company, because these people understand it probably as well as anybody at that point.
Right. I think it was funny. I mean, we were interviewing so many people, and for our account executive roles, and our job description was sufficiently vague where we would consider kind of recent grads as well as looking for people who call it a year or two of experience under their belt. And we kept interviewing all these folks, that had just graduated from school that seemed really bright and very motivated and hungry, but we just kept going, they don't feel like they've got the experience. They're going to be able to excel in this account executive role right away. And that was sort of the genesis for us of saying, well, why don't we hire a bunch of them, turn them into SDRs? And this was, mind you, back probably 2010. So the beginning of that SDR revolution. And it was fantastic. I mean, I think it really worked for us in terms of growing the company and keeping culture strong and training people to sell the way that we want them to sell, and not hiring someone in from externally and trying to correct bad habits or, get them excited about our product versus another product they've sold. So I'd wholeheartely recommend that.
Yeah. Or you're not dealing with the culture fit issue, which is really a critical one in sales. So, all right, let's talk a little bit about pattern. So how does pattern help at all with this challenge of the overwhelm that we talked about at the beginning? I mean, what's it set up to do? And tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, if you don't mind, I can go back a little bit to some of the pains that I faced at Wildfire as a VP of sales,
Sure.
Two of the big problems that that we face are around data entry, how to get data from the front lines into your system of record when, you're conflicted about bothering your reps to go do this kind of really boring menial task of updating information, which they're probably not likely to do kind of in entirety anyway, and needing that information to power the forecast, to power the business. And the second, big thing that I personally struggle with at Wildfire was creating replicability. How do you, you have a process, you develop, sophisticated sales organizations develop a process, a recipe for how they expect sales to be done. And they want their reps actually following that process. And what I found is, creating that as the first step, creating a process is step one, but implementing that process is actually really difficult because it's just very hard for reps to take something theoretical that is in a poster on your wall in the office and integrate that into every single interaction they're having with customers. Mm-hmm. And my co-founders and I started kind of looking at that problem from our perspective as leaders and sales ops people and realized that it's not so much about the lack of data in the system and more about the fact that the tools that exist today for reps, that are used when they're engaging with customers are really, they're not specialized. Reps are using off-the-shelf consumer-grade tools like email, calendar, a phone, just a regular phone, and a notepad, whether that be a digital format or a pen and paper format, that doesn't help them, gather context about the people they're meeting with, the opportunities that they're chatting about, the products they're speaking about, and doesn't help them during the course of that interaction by giving them the right guidance in terms of some people call it a play, what play to run, what questions to ask, what activities to complete, and then what structured data to send back to the system and to other people in the organization. And so that for us was the inspiration behind Pattern, which is effectively trying to create a window into that meeting, to give sales reps a competitive advantage when they're meeting with customers and preparing them to have a great outcome, to helping them execute that meeting, and then taking care of a lot of the follow-up work afterwards, the sharing of that information to a system of record and to everyone else in the org. So we very much try to deal with that overwhelm problem by connecting those disparate data sets, trying to keep the reps process as simple and as consistent with what it is today, while we, under the surface, obfuscate a lot of that complexity and handle a lot of that the workflow on their behalf to free them up to have more conversations with customers.
And so is this tool, so may take the listeners through just a little bit step by step, because you use the framework of a note, which is this overlay that in sort of 2 or 3 different ways enable you to put information back into system of record, which for your case really happens to be Salesforce. Because I don't think you haven't done any other integrations other than Salesforce, right?
That's correct. That's where we're integrated into Salesforce at the moment.
So maybe take people through like the workflow of how it'd be used. Sure.
So, the simplest way to think about it is, when we go out and talk to the reps in our market or in our demographic, 75% of them are using a digital note-taking solution to collect information about their customers and their customer engagements. And the majority of what's used are the likes of Evernote, Apple Notes, et cetera. And I think those are perfectly fine tools. Evernote is very well designed for the purpose of being kind of a general consumer product. But that, Evernote is not deeply connected to the systems that you use most regularly, your email, your calendar, your CRM. It doesn't understand the people that you're meeting with by default. It doesn't understand where those people are in a selling cycle and kind of what you should be mentioning to them. And so, what we're finding success with is helping reps understand that instead of using kind of an off-the-shelf tool that's meant for the average sort of commercial or consumer user, Pattern feels very much similar in the sense that it's a place where you can take notes, but it provides a lot more rich context, about what you're doing. So we've tried to make the switch as seamless as possible, and keep people in the flow of what they're doing today, just with a whole lot more intelligence and automated workflow to save them time and make them smarter.
So is this geared for SDRs or account execs?
We definitely have users across both roles. I would say the strongest fit thus far has been with account executives. And, I guess we think about sort of the tools in our landscape, and there's a lot of tools out there, some great companies that are doing a lot to help drive that first interaction, right? With the first call between whether it's an SDR or an AE and that prospect. And And then those tools effectively shut off and they go back and find more people to talk to. But there really aren't any systems that we can find that are effectively trying to help that salesperson navigate the complexity of that relationship, and end up with a successful close. And that's, I think, the area that we're focused on is, once you make that human to human connection, how do you really get the most out of that relationship? How do you successfully navigate that relationship from, hi, I'm Derek, to, hey, welcome aboard, you're our newest customer.
And so, again, someone's going to be sitting down at their computer. They're looking at what looks like a note, basically, right? So it's sort of extrapolating based on what I've seen is which you can bring some Salesforce fields into this note. So maybe take people through that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. So I think just to simplify it a little bit, if we think about if you use something to the likes of Evernote or Apple Notes today, and you're in sales or customer facing role, all we're really asking you to do is just, change the place where you take those notes. And that's pattern. And so you can take notes the same way that you do in Evernote, but then at the end of that interaction, we already know who you're meeting with in terms of the company. We know, what opportunity it is. We know which people are in that meeting. We've done research for you on those people. And then at the end of that meeting, what you can do is just effectively say, hey, I want to share this information with my team and with my CRM. And we handle the many operations that, either in some cases aren't being done or are being done very tediously,
right?
With the click of a button. And so that is what I think when we hear from our users, they're saving 5 hours per week in terms of just, the like 7 PM time blocks of like updating their pipeline. Those things are gone. They can end up spending more time, calling for new customers and doing other things that add more value than data entry.
Well, but then also you have this facility to be able to, and the discipline and the habit of taking a note is a critical habit to get into, I believe, for sales, because trying to recall everything. I mean, I remember my first job. We were out making cold calls in the field, and we'd make 30, 40 cold calls a day. Some business park over in Hayward or Union City, and then we have to go back up and fill out our call sheets at night.
Exactly,
and it was complete fiction, right? So now, since you can do this, in the moment, it accurately capture what's going on. So you're not relying on everybody's memory's bad. You just have to owe up to him. It's listening to the show. You think you have a great memory. The fact is, none of us do. And so instead of incorrectly remembering things, you can have details there that accurately reflect what happened in the call, which I think is one of the huge elements that's missing, short of manager sitting down listening to every recorded call that was made. Is now they have a way to get more detail.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, obviously this is our business, so we think a lot about this, and we talk to people, and it seems like there's definitely a split between people that actually will go back and look at their notes and get value from that versus just the value that you get in terms of recording something in the moment. It's more imprinted on your brain. You're more likely to remember it. I think there's obviously some combination of both, but in the going back to the overwhelm comment, as reps are just bombarded with lots of stuff, it definitely is helpful to have quick context at your fingertips regarding like, oh, what did we talk about? Where did I leave this off? What are my action items? And how do I get that as effectively and quickly as possible? And so we're seeing a lot of resonance with our user base in terms of the product that we're bringing to market at this point on that front.
Well, I think one other thing that it seems like you would facilitate with this too is that, to me, again, it's another sort of essential sales behavior that you want to get into if you want to continue to build rapport and trust, is sending recaps of meetings or calls to customers. Because, I mean, first of all, it's perceived to be impressive because very few people do it. It is a differentiator. And from the customer standpoint, they are saying, wow, this person respects my time.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I've seen research that says that, the happiest, most kind of longest tenured customers, one of the biggest determinants of those customers is their satisfaction with the sales process. And it's just, whether you say it's you only get one chance to make a first impression or there's some other thing there, I'm not sure, but I've always been kind of an organizational freak. And for me, it's always been really important to just try to be as responsive to customers as possible. And in terms of getting back to them quickly, but also being attentive and understanding their needs. And I just, it's unfortunate when you see salespeople that they just, they can't manage that, or they don't feel like that's important. And that's one of the core tenets of what we're doing here at Pattern as well, is leveraging that data that we have, right? We can see when you go meet with Acme Corporation, we can see that right after that meeting, you have yet to send a follow-up email. We can actually prompt you to say, hey, let's make sure that you don't forget to do that. Because if you wake up a week later and you forgot to follow up that great meeting with the action items and the things that you said you were going to deliver, I mean, guess what? I think your chances of winning that deal have declined pretty dramatically. And that's just one little tiny step, one little interaction in the process. But those things add up and they're really important.
Well, they do. And so when you send a note to a prospect, let's say it was a good meeting, you're just like you reading your notes, or you taking a note physically so it reinforces what was said, sending that note and them reading it reinforces the good feelings and what they felt they experienced out of that meeting. And to your point is, it's been all over the literature in the last year, the value of the buying experience or the sales process, you talked about it, is a critical element in customer satisfaction.
Yeah, totally. And I had this kind of crazy vision for the future that I don't know when it will materialize, but I believe that there will probably at some point exist, I don't know if it's a tool or if it's a framework or it's just kind of best practice, where there's a portal in which the buyer and seller can communicate effectively. So that, if you think forward, maybe the future of Pattern is that the notepad is collaborative in the sense that, like, I'm selling to you and we can both be on there at the same time, and I can assign tasks to you, and that system can kind of make sure that you're being kept up to speed on that. And then effectively we're working together. It's not this sort of, I've got my process that you don't know about that I'm taking you through, and you've got your process that I don't know about that I'm trying to uncover. Instead, we're mutually agreeing that, hey, if we're both into this, we want to see this through to completion. Win, lose or draw, let's work together. Let's collaborate. And I mean, there's all kinds of new collaboration tools out there for internal communication. I think it'll be just a natural extension that turns into something that exists between folks in different companies.
Yeah, well, as you said, I mean, so many of the pieces exist right now. It seems like it wouldn't be that far into the distance. I mean, there's companies out selling the buyer portal type services. SaaS companies, Buyer Deck, and ClearSlide sort of has that type of functionality to some degree, and so on. It tends to be a little bit more for delivery of information versus the collaboration. But you can certainly see that there's steps being taken in that direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it feels like there probably needs to be, to me, some sort of a shift, a belief shift, where, and I might be wrong, but where there's actually, this becomes kind of like the way that buyers want to be sold, and the way that sellers want to engage in a buying process. And for whatever reason, I'm just not feeling like that sort of watershed moment is here yet. And I guess I'm predicting that it'll come, but maybe not. Maybe people prefer to sort of have their own process, and they want to sort of reveal that as they see fit for their own advantage.
Well, I think part of the issue is, and this was raised, I think, in the book, The Challenger Customer, is that this process of buying, whether it's a subscription to a SaaS application like yours, or buying something a little more complex, depending on the level of complexity, is not something that companies practice. They don't practice the buying of that. So it's not,
right.
We keep wanting to say, this customer has a buying process. Yeah, I don't think most companies do. Right? They may have not a
codified one, is what you're saying. I mean, of course they're going to go through some process, but it's not totally clear. It's kind of random as it unfolds.
Right, because they haven't done it much, or they didn't do it before. The people that did it when they last bought it 2 years ago are all in different levels of responsibility. So they have an approval process based on dollar signing authority.
Right.
But what's beneath that? I still think sellers need to sort of come to grips with the fact that buyers really don't know it. I mean, that's sometimes part of your role, is to help them understand how that's going to take place.
Yeah. So one of my favorite sales trainers is a guy named Skip Miller, and he always says buyers want to be led. And I agree with that. I think this is where there's a big opportunity for companies like ours and people that are selling products like ours, is to kind of to be students of how people are buying and what organizations seem to be managing the process successfully. and kind of represent that as a model to our customers to say, hey, you may have a totally different process, and that's fine, but here's how we see this unfolding to mutual success on both sides. How does this look? Does this seem off base? I think people are inclined to say, oh yeah, that makes sense. Maybe I should get my legal team involved sooner. Maybe you're right. I probably do need to involve my security person, because if I don't, that's going to be something that ends up holding up the deal at the last minute. So I think there's a big opportunity for us as sellers to, be students of that and then deliver that back to buyers as a value, right? As a way that they can actually make sure that they're doing the best job to evaluate solutions, whether there's ours or somebody else's.
Yeah. I mean, there are some thought leaders out there that have been sort of advocating this for a number of years now, that's really the first step in the selling process, is helping the prospect understand their buying process. Because again, for most, other than commodity type products, things that are bought infrequently, it's not going to be codified because it doesn't happen that often.
Right. Exactly.
So it's a good step to take, and then it starts the whole consultative selling. But the other sort of caveat there though too is we have this tendency to try to oversimplify. It's funny, we have push-pull. Sometimes we're making our sales process too complex, but on the other hand, we're also sort of maybe not understanding what all the steps that are in it. And buyers, I think, have the same issues. And we want to say, oh yeah, we got the 6-step process, and we got defined exit criteria for every stage, each of the 6 stages. But each stage could have 20 steps in it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like we're not reconciling that part yet, which is, I think, is still something else that's to come that helps sales teams be more efficient, is really understand all the steps they have to go through, because each one consumes time.
Right. We think a lot about that. And there's definitely, from a product perspective, we're starting to tackle that in a way that I think is unique in the market. But I guess my interpretation of that is, maybe it's just that sellers were optimistic. I think you kind of have to be optimistic to be in sales. If you're pessimistic, the amount of rejection that you get on a daily basis, I think if you're just naturally pessimistic, it's hard to stick around and survive all that rejection. But because we're so naturally optimistic, when you hear one of those buying words, or you see one of those buying signals, we're just, we want to cut corners. We want to jump to the next stage. If somebody calls in and says, hey, that's a great, I love what you guys are doing, send me a proposal. Like we just get really excited and we fire off a proposal, even though that probably in our, heart of hearts, we know that's maybe not the best thing to do. We should probably step back and go, hey, let's do a little bit more discovery. Let me understand a little bit more. But it's just hard not to be optimistic. And it's hard sometimes to be disciplined about being methodical and going slow effectively to go fast.
Well, that is the key. That is the key, is going, because if you skip the step, you have to come back and repeat it. And that can be hard, I was talking about this you disrupt the deal.
If you've already given someone a proposal to go back and say you want to do a discovery call, good luck. I think they feel like they've got what they need.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, how'd you give me a proposal without us doing discovery? Right?
Yeah, right.
Well, I had recently just interviewed David Allen, who wrote the book Getting Things Done. Yes. I don't know if you've read that book, but and I reference that in my book, Amp Up Your Sales, is that we can define a 5-step process, but I sort of did that hypothetically, and so the first step was responding to an inbound lead, and this one hypothetical one I put together. There are 24 steps in responding to an inbound lead. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How do you do that every single time?
Right. If you're going to you got to do some research. I don't want to bore people by reading through it, but so yeah, how do we really effectively put those, that level of detail? We just assume people sort of have the discipline, the habits, and the behaviors to take all those 24 steps, but that's really where we end up missing things. And an application like yours starts helping in that regard, because you're documenting real time, and you can begin to see, okay, there's there are 24 elements of this step, and we've only done 16 of them. We better finish it if we really want to be responsive to the customer.
Right. I think that's right. One of my former colleagues and friends said that the top salespeople are the guys that do every single step of the process 1% to 2% better than everybody else. And over time, that adds up to a pretty large advantage in terms of winning. And,
Yep.
so there's a couple ways to handle this. I think one is that systems can understand now, when these steps are not being done, and they can actually assist with helping getting those steps done, whether it's doing them automatically. I mean, you see that in the SDR kind of email automation space, right? That's what cadences are all about. Like, we're going to send an email, and if that email is not responded to 3 days later, we're going to send something else. We're not waiting on the SDR to go send that next email.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think systems definitely have a role in this. And then the other angle, I mean, I struggle with this because I'm a person that, again, like I mentioned, is sort of a type A organization person, but I just think it's unrealistic to expect, as a sales leader, I think it's unrealistic to expect that every single step in your process is followed every single time.
Mm-hmm.
I think, so that's one thing. The second thing I would say, that as I think about this from my own experience, what's just as important as developing the process and training someone on the process is instilling the belief in those people that the process is going to add value, that it's going to result in a better outcome. Because until we get to the point where we automate salespeople entirely, or you literally just have them click through every single action, kind of in a rote manner every single day. I mean, you really need to rely on people to be motivated to create the outcome that they want. And if they believe that this process is going to help them, they're much more likely to learn it, internalize it, and try to execute it versus, I think the alternative is management decides that, hey, we need to have a sales process. We do a 2-day offsite with all the leadership team, and we develop this 5-stage process with 100 steps. And we roll it out to the sales team on Monday and say, like, all right, this is this is what's now expected of you. I mean, good luck. Because I just don't think, people aren't going to believe in it. If they don't believe in it, they're not going to do it. If they don't do it, one, the outcome that you want isn't going to materialize, and two, you're going to be endlessly frustrated because nobody's doing what you want them to do. So the belief for me is pretty critical in getting sales folks to do this more often.
Okay, so last question, because we've already run over, but great conversation. So what they need, a belief in your process or a belief in a process? See, because one thing that I see is that, at least in sort of this, sort of inside sales, predictable revenue model that everybody's embracing in Silicon Valley is we're not taking advantage of the uniqueness, the individual strengths, and so on of individuals that maybe have a process that's might not be conforming 100%, but is going to be much more effective for them.
Mm-hmm.
So I want them to believe in a process, absolutely, but I'm not always sure that we serve ourselves well by saying you have to believe in this process.
I would definitely agree with that. I think where I see the process being, so in my own experience, when I was VP of sales at Wildfire, in the very early days, our sales process was nothing more than stage names on opportunities in Salesforce. Mm-hmm. And then you start to realize that, salesperson A's idea of what a discovery stage looks like varies widely from salesperson B's. And then you get to the point of saying, well, not only for people that maybe aren't performing incredibly well or new people that come into the organization, it probably makes sense to demystify that black box of what we expect salespeople to do. Or, we're going to do the research to figure out what does a successful sale look like on our side. Let's just document that. And I think where that becomes most helpful is for people that are underperforming and, can't clearly articulate that they have a process or don't understand why it's not working, and new people in the organization. I think at some level, I think there's some element of process, whether it's at the stage level or something else, where you kind of need everybody to generally conform. But if your top salesperson, likes to run discovery meetings differently than, quote unquote, is your best practice, I mean, go for it. I think that's where you actually can harness that innovation and sort of update your process, innovate your process, and learn from, the best of what's happening on the floor to impact the rest of your organization. So I would definitely agree that you don't want to, stifle any innovation. You don't want to make people follow the exact process that you've created because you think it's the best, because the minute you create it, it's outdated. Yeah. I just think, to your point, you want to train people to believe that a process and one that they can articulate and one that they can ideally measure is helping. Is going to lead to a better outcome.
Yeah, I just find it sort of ironic at times that companies in industry are predicated on the idea of disruption are most intent on propagating a sales model that's most about conformity. Mm-hmm. And I just find the irony intriguing. So,
I mean, there's probably another conversation, but there's, similar to what we were talking about, buyers having more information than ever before. I think there's just long been this belief that sales is an art. It's like, it's just, you're born successful at sales and you just got to find those people that are really good, versus understanding that sales can actually be a little bit more of a science. And so I think you're starting to see that emerge now, and people breaking down what a successful seller looks like, what a successful sale looks like, and trying to help other people, whether they be underperformers or new people, sort of emulate those behaviors as consistently as possible. And I think that's really promising. And I'm definitely a believer in that approach.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a combination of the two, science and art. So, well, good. Well, Derek, we could go on forever, but I don't want to take up any more of your time. So thanks for being on the show. So tell folks how they can find out more about Pattern and connect with you.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. I would agree. This has been a really fun conversation. And if you're interested in checking out Pattern, it's free to try. Go to getpattern.com. And you can email me at derek@getpattern.com if you like. I'm not much for Twitter these days, but my Twitter handle is @dbdraper. If you want to tweet me, I might tweet you back. I'll try to stay on top of it, but feel free to send me a question or drop me an email if anybody wants to chat.
All right, great. Well, again, thank you for being on the show. And friends, thank you for spending this time with us today. Remember, come back and join us again tomorrow on another great episode. And until then, take a minute, please. Go to iTunes, subscribe to this podcast, leave a review. I want to hear what we can do to serve you better and provide more value for you. So again, I'm your host, Danny Paul. Thanks for joining me. Good selling, everyone.